Hey everybody. So this is part 2 of our New England's Unsolved promo video. The first part was how we actually set up our little mini set, and I talked about the cameras and how we lit it and how we shot it. And this is part 2 where I do the actual color correction. If you want to see part 1, you can click on this link right here. Boom. Or if you're just curious about the color correction, you can just keep on watching. So let's take a look at how I match these two shots. So if you look at the two clips, this is the FS7, that's the AF100. They're pretty close. Probably not a perfect match, but they're pretty close. This is the raw AF100, and this is the raw Sony FS7. So this doesn't look anything like this. Now, you'll have this happen often when you're a colorist. A reality television show producer once told me, if there's a camera laying around, I'm going to use it. And even if you're shooting log on a really big production, if there's a 5D hanging around, someone's going to pick it up and start shooting with it. And it's your job as the colorist to make the 5D match the Red camera, match the Alexa camera, match the 7D camera, match the AF100. So this is a much more common thing to do than you'd think. So when I have to match these two cameras, this is my thought process. Now keep in mind, every situation is different and every shoot is different, but as a general rule, this is my thought process when I try to match two cameras like this. So you're only as strong as your weakest link. And the weak link in this production was our AF100. I'm not saying the AF100 is a bad camera, it's just not as good as a Sony FS7. So when I have to do shots like this and shoots like this, I will take the weakest camera and start there. I'll get that camera to look good, and then I'll match it to the better cameras. I can make a better camera look not so good, but it's really hard to make a not so good camera look good. And again, no slam on the AF100, but its colors aren't nearly as robust as an FS7 shooting in log, or another Panasonic camera that shoots in log. So let's take a look at what I did. So I'm looking at this shot initially, and we've got some exposure issues. It's a little overexposed. Now these monitors are pretty hot to begin with, but I'm looking at Bob's face. It might be a titch hot, and his face kind of looks a bit greenish, ever so slightly to the green. So in the first node, what I did was this. I crushed my blacks, I lowered my gammas a little bit, I lowered my gain a lot, and I pushed my gain and my gamma up towards magenta. This image, probably a little too red, but I can fix it as I go along. Certainly better than that. This is a very dark and serious subject. I don't want it to be too bright and cheery, and I certainly don't want my talent's face to look a little greenish yellowish. So that's my first node. Too red, I understand that, but I can fix that. This is the second node. All I did in the second node was come in here and I crushed my blacks ever so slightly and I brought my whites up just a little bit. So that's off, that's on. So for node 3, Bob's shirt was really kind of blue and it's not so blue there. So I qualified it and the key was actually pretty good. I didn't even have to draw a shape around it, which surprised me because I thought I was going to pick up some blue from those televisions. And I brightened that up a little bit in the gain, and I pushed it to blue. So that's no correction, kind of red, kind of washed out, kind of nasty. That's his color-corrected shirt. Then I came in, and I color-corrected Bob's face. Pulled the key off his face. Bit rough, but that's okay. I tracked this shape around it. I adjusted my gain up. I made his face a little brighter, and I felt it was too saturated, so I brought down my master saturation here. And then I did a lot of mid-tone detailing. I turned that way down. What I found is when you shoot with Rec 709 cameras that are designed to shoot video, there's all kinds of sharpening filters and all kinds of things that those cameras will do to get you a better Rec 709 picture. Cheats aren't the right word. A better way to think of it would be there's little things in those cameras to overcome the limitations of Rec 709. And one of those things they do is they seem to crank up the sharpness a lot in those cameras. What I did was I turned my mid-tone detail down on Bob to give his skin a little softer look. So that's off. Very dark, very contrasty, very harsh. It's a little too sharp. That's with it on. It's a subtle adjustment, but it softens up his skin a little bit and makes his face a little brighter. And then I felt his whole face was still a little too dark. So I tracked the shape to his head like this. I came in, and I brought my gain up and my gamma up just a little bit to make it overall a little bit brighter. So node 6 is the monitor. It's square, and because it was a slider shot, it tracked quite nicely. It's a nice even move. The Resolve tracker seemed to like it a lot. I just tracked that monitor like that, and I was able to color correct the inside of the monitor. And in this case, I just brightened it up. There were shots where you could see Bob's face in that monitor, and I color corrected Bob's face in the monitor. It was very dark and it was very red. And that's the beauty of the Resolve, is this stuff seems to track quite nicely, especially when you're doing a slider move, and I'm able to bring out the brightness in that monitor. And here was the last node that I did. This is a more of a stylistic thing. This monitor was too sharply in focus. Now, this was shot with a 24mm prime lens, which means just about everything's going to be in focus. We wanted to use a little bit of a longer lens, but we noticed when we used a longer lens on this shot, this monitor just turned to blurry mush, and you couldn't see what was in there at all. So I decided to use the wider lens and just kind of live with my background being in such sharp focus. But what I was able to do is I tracked this shape to this big monitor here. You can see how it tracks with it. And I came in and I blurred it ever so slightly. So this is off, very sharp, very in focus, and that's with it on. So this is our final shot. We've started here, a bit too bright. His shirt was kind of flat. His face looked a little bit too green to me. This monitor was too much in focus, and that's where we ended up. I'll play it down for you here. This is the finished shot, and it's looking kind of nice. So once I had this shot done, I went over and I decided to start doing stuff with my log shot. So here's my first node. I used a log node. You can see right here, this means it's log. All I did was bring my contrast up. So what I'm looking at is my blacks and my whites, and I can bop back to the first shot. There's my blacks, and there's my whites are up here. So this shot's pretty close, contrast-wise. Those whites could probably be a little brighter. I did another video on log and log color correcting, and what I discovered was in the first node, you really have to put some contrast back in on the first shot, or you're going to be going nuts. It's not going to behave like you think it would behave. The second node, I just did a simple color boost. You can see the saturation jump right up. So if I look up in this shot, the scopes are right here. There's the reds. They probably could have had a little more, but I'm just getting close. Node 1 was contrast. Node 2 was saturation. Okay, so here's node 3. Here's it off. Here's it on. If you look at the vector scope, this is with the node off. You want that blob to kind of emanate from the middle, and it's not. This is with it on. Don't even look at the picture. Look at the scopes. That's blob off. It's obviously to the right of the center. That's with it on. All I did was adjusted the blue in my black channels. See how on his shirt here is kind of blue? This black down here looks a little blue. You can see in the waveform, it's a little bit blue in those blacks. Now you're going to have blue right here. That's fine. But those blues are up here because they're brighter. Watch what happens when I turn the node on. Plump. Those blues go away. We have nice blacks here. His shirt is neutral. The exposure looks pretty good. Moving on to node 4. So node 4, that's off. This is on. I brightened up my gain in node 4, and I pushed the gain a little bit to the red to get some color back into his face. And I really wanted these monitors to pop. So what I came in here and I did was, this is a hue versus saturation. And what this means is anything blue in that picture is going to be more saturated. So that's with the node off. That's with it on. There's a little more color back into his face, but there's a lot more color in that unsolved graphic. Off, on, off, on. And you can see in the vector scope here, that's with it off. That's the blue of the monitor, and that's with it on. So that blue is really saturated, and you can see the red come up a little bit too. That's in his face. So in node 5, I had the same problem with the shirt as I did in the previous node. All I did was key it. I had to mask this one, but luckily he's not moving around so much. So in my gain channel, I brought out some reds, and I bumped up the saturation. So in this shot, all I did was the gain is I pushed it towards the blue, which got rid of the red and gave us more blue. You can look at his two shirts here and the two shots. It's pretty close. So node 6 was Bob's face. I did a key on Bob's face, like so. This is knocking out the red in the monitor because it was picking up that red line there. So I drew a mask around it and inverted it. And on Bob's face, if we look real close, I felt this was a little bit too overexposed. I thought his face was a bit too bright. I brought down the gain on his face. I brought the gamma up a little bit, and I pushed them both to red to get some color back into his face. So that's off. Little titch yellowy. I thought it was too bright over here and on this side of his face. That's where that big light was coming from, if you remember from the setup. And that's what I turned it into. I was happy with the exposure on Bob's face here, meaning I got rid of a lot of that brightness and I made it red, but I thought it was a little too saturated. So I rekeyed Bob's face in node 10, like this, and I just brought my saturation down a little bit. I thought his flesh tones looked a little bit better like this versus like that. I felt that was too red. I thought that was too bright. So I got Bob there, exposure good, too pink, come up to this node, desaturate it. That seemed a lot healthier, and it seemed to match this shot a lot more. And finally, at the very end, so in node 8, I did a qualifier key. This part here was that blue background. That's coming from the blue light that we set up on the floor. And I felt that it wasn't reading enough. It wasn't blue enough. So that's with it off. That's with it on. Slight adjustment. I made it a little brighter. And in my lift, I pushed it towards blue to make that blue behind his head pop out a little more. And finally, I was looking at the entire shot. So I'm looking at the scopes in this last node here, and the whites aren't at 100. It's not bright enough. That it's not punching off the screen enough. So all I did in the final node was I brought up my gain a lot and my gamma a little bit. Now, when I did that, I got some of that light back into his face, but that's okay, I felt. And sometimes when you color correct, this will happen. You'll think you'll get it right up here in node 6 or node 10, and then get all the way to the end, and you'll say to yourself, you know what, I just need it to be brighter. And it's often easier to put a node at the end and make it brighter than to come back here and start fiddly-fitzing with these color corrections. This node basically undid this node, but that's okay. That's part of the process. And sometimes, like I said, it's just easier to fix it with one node at the end than go back here and dig out these individual nodes. So I showed you guys how I corrected each individual shot. This is the shot I did first, the AF100 shot. That's looking good. That's my master shot. I would come in here and let's add new still album 5. I'm going to grab the last frame of this shot. This is the last frame before the cut. I'm going to grab a still of this. I'm going to play this still. Now this is in my still store. So when I go to this shot, what I can do is I can wipe between the shot of Bob and the previous shot. So this is how I will often color correct. I will do the master shot first, which in this case was the slider shot, the AF100 shot. And then I bounce back and forth. I'll do a wipe in between my master shot, which was this one, and the shot I'm trying to match it to, which was this one. So if we look at these two shots, it's pretty close. I'm looking at the blue in his shirt. It's pretty good. I'm looking at his jacket. Again, it wasn't perfect. This jacket here in the log shot was bluer than this part of the shirt here, but I decided to live with that. His hair looks the same. His face looks the same. These two shots, although not perfect, they're pretty close. I felt that cutting between this shot and this shot, it was hard to notice his blue shirt, and it would have involved a whole lot of masking and keying and rotoscoping because this black is so similar to this black. It just didn't seem worth the effort. So if I turn that off and I go back between the shots, I felt it was close enough. It's not perfect, but it seemed like an awful lot of work to get it to perfect for very minimal results. I mean, this part of the jacket here versus this part of the jacket here didn't seem worth the time or effort. His face looked pretty good. The blues in the monitors looked pretty good. I was happy with that. So I'll play the spot at the end, and I hope this helped you guys. So that's how you match two different cameras in two different color spaces. Those are some tips and tricks and strategies that I've used. Sometimes matching two cameras like that is easy. Sometimes matching two cameras like that is an absolute nightmare. I hope I gave you guys a place to start, a place to jump off from. I'll show you the promo at the end, and happy correcting, everybody.
In Allenstown, New Hampshire, police are still trying to identify the bodies found in barrels out in the woods. Police know who the killer is. We found a detective who put this guy behind bars for yet another murder. The victim in this case had been missing for 4 months, so police went to the house, and what they found to this day still bothers them.
New England's Unsolved, tonight at 11.